Welcome back. Now in this tutorial, we're just gonna show what we did in the previous lesson. I'm gonna start the game and I'm gonna test it. Just let it generate the lighting. When I click on the bed, I place the bed in the world, and I'm still able to collide with things, and I'm even able to place them. So what we want to do next is make sure we are only able to place an object if the object isn't colliding or overlapping with anything. Again, this video is going to be covering extremely introductory stuff, so I'm going to make everything extremely simple to understand and easy to work with. So we'll start by going to our prefab folder and select the prefab we open it, and we just go into perspective mode, see what we have here. So we have because the origin on this object was set to the bottom left here, I just created an empty game object just to drop the bed on so that I could have the bed at the center of where my cursor is. So whenever I raycast into the world, it hits that point, and that is where the bed's going to move. Okay, so we're going to add a script. So at the end of this project, we're going to have 3 scripts. One for the manager, one for the button to tell it what to instantiate, and then one for the actual object. So we're going to, in this lesson, we're going to create the object script by simply, we need to make copies of this bed. So I'm going to rename this bed to original. I'm going to Control D to duplicate that, F2 to rename this one, and we're going to call this overlapped. So this is going to be the mesh we're going to use when we overlap something. Then we're going to duplicate that one more time, and this one's going to be not overlapped. There we go. And all of these are now selected. So I'm going to hide all of them for the time being and turn them on as I need them. So I'm going to start by turning on the overlapped one. And I need to create a materials folder because I'm going to create 2 basic materials. So not a material folder, damn it. So materials. I'm going to go into this folder and we're going to create our first material. This is going to be our overlapped material. I'm going to make that the traditional red, so red will be overlapped, and I'm going to close that. But I also want to add a little bit of transparency, so you kind of get that Fortnite 2-point hospital look when you're dropping an object initially. It's normally all a single color, has a certain amount of transparency just to show you what the object looks like and where you can place it. But in order to add transparency, if you look at the material at the top here, it says rendering mode is opaque. So in order for it to have any transparency, we need to change it from opaque to transparency. And the way the alpha works on these default standard materials is the alpha is actually part of the color. So if you click the color, you'll see you got your R, G, and B, and then you have your alpha. So let's just tweak the alpha. So I'm going to put this down to around about, let's make it 80. And this material I'm now going to assign to all the different parts of this model until all of it is basically the same material. So I'm just assigning it manually. I could have selected all of them and assigned it, but some of these objects have multiple materials, so it wouldn't work as well. Okay, so that's it. That's the model for my overlapped. I can now hide it. I'm going to hide the not overlapped one and do the same thing, but this time duplicate the material. Control D. Rename this one to not overlapped, and I'm going to change that to be more of a green color, like green for go, red for stop type thing. I'm going to now do the same thing. I'm going to assign it to all the different aspects of the model. Just add it to the legs, and that should be it. So now we have the 2 objects. So the idea for this is if I turn them on and just show you, don't move them. I'm just going to move them just to show you what I'm planning to do. Is when we're overlapping something, this object is going to be visible, but these 2 aren't. When I'm not overlapping something, this one's going to be invisible, that one's going to be invisible, but the green one is going to be visible. So it's just a representational thing. It's not. The final one we're going to drop is the original one. So now, just for this case, I'm going to hide all of them because I'll turn them on and off in code. Okay, let's start with the code. So I'm going to select my double base. I'm going to add a box collider. First, we need to have collision so I can calculate when objects are overlapping each other. So I need to turn one of them on. so I can see the model. You'll see that the box collider doesn't fit the object because I'm actually assigning it to an empty game object and not to the actual models. I want the parent to be the one that has all the information on it, and then all I need to do is just change the children to whatever model I want to actually instantiate into the world. Just makes it so much easier to duplicate the prefab, change the models, and the code stays the same. Okay, so let's make this collider fit the object. So first I'm going to click the Y arrow in the gimbal at the top here, and then I'm going to click the gray block in the middle just to go into orthographic mode. I'm going to click the Edit Collider button, and I'm just going to go in and adjust the collider to fit the object a little bit better. I'm not going to be 100% accurate, just accurate enough so that I don't get any weird, funky results. Once I'm happy with this, I'm just going to click the bottom button here so I can go back to the front view. I'm going to adjust the collider again here, and this time when I do the bottom of the object, I'm not going to make the collider completely flush with the bottom. I'm just going to pull it up a little bit because I don't want it to collide with the floor and say, not going to place it. So I'm just pushing it a little higher. I'm going to go back into perspective mode, and that's what the collider looks like. We're done with the collider. Now, any of you who've ever worked with rigid bodies or physics or any kind of collision, you need to know that one of the objects needs to have a rigid body for this to work. So we need to add a rigid body. And I'm going to make sure that it's set to is kinematic. I don't want it to be affected by forces or affected by gravity. I just want to actually get the collision event from when these objects collide so that I can do something. And I'm also changing the collision detection to be continuous. Okay, so over here it says kinematic bodies only supports speculative continuous. That is fine. We can leave it as that. And I'm also going to turn on is trigger on the collider. I don't care if they actually collide with each other. I just need to get the events that get called when that happens. Okay, now that we have added the box collider and the rigid body, we're going to add the flow machine. And again, edit graph is grayed out because we need to actually create the script first. So I'm going to go new. I'm going to go to my scripts folder, and I'm going to call this one, let's just call it prefab. I want to save that. I want to click the edit graph button. I'm just going to dock my graph down here. Just make this a little bit smaller, and we're pretty much good to go. So I'm not going to need the start or the update, so I'm going to delete those. And I'm just going to go and maximize this viewport so we can see it for when we're coding. And if you maximize your viewport by holding Shift and Spacebar, you can do that to any window. As long as your cursor is hovering over that aspect of Unity, Shift and Spacebar will maximize that window. Okay, so we need to start by creating a few variables. So in the scene, we need to know if we're overlapping something. So I'm going to type in overlapping. It's going to be a Boolean. And by default, it's not overlapping, so I'm going to leave it to false. So that stays as it is. Next one is object. I need to create 4 variables. The first one is for my original model. It's going to be a game object. And the next one's going to be for my overlapped model. It's going to be a game object. The next one's going to be for my not overlapped model. It's going to be a game object. And then the last one is going to be whether we've dropped the object into the world. So I'm just going to call this dropped object. And if this is going to be a Boolean. So if it's been dropped, it's going to be true. But right now it's false because it hasn't been dropped. Okay, so let's drag all the required variables. So I'm going to click Window and say Variables. I just want to make sure I open this up here. Actually, I really don't need that. I can just drop it over here. So I'm going to go change it again. It's a bug with Bolt. If you don't actually assign a variable straight away, it forgets the type of variable. So I'm going to say this is my original object. My overlapped object needs to be a game object, and that's going to be my overlapped object. And then the last one is also a game object, and that needs to be my not overlapped. Like I said, there's a lot of better ways to do this, but if you're starting out and you want to do something like this, this is the easiest way to kind of wrap your brain around it. So now that I have a reference to my original object, my overlapped object, and my not overlapped object, I'm able to enable and disable these objects based on what I want out of it. So we're going to go into our code. I'm going to type on trigger stay. Now, the reason I'm using on trigger stay is simply because if two objects kind of start inside of each other, on trigger stay is gonna work. Hold on. Ooh, sneeze, so close. So on trigger stay means it's going to calculate every frame that it's inside of another object, and it's going to tell us what to do. So on trigger enter will only happen if you enter another object. If two objects are already inside of each other, this isn't going to work the way it's supposed to work. Okay. But I only want to do this if dropped is false. So we're going to add a branch. We need to put in some fail safes so nothing weird happens. So if dropped is false, then I want to be able to change the material from overlapped to not overlapped based on what we're doing. So we're going to be doing that. So let me just push this across because later on I'm going to copy it. So I just want to make it easy for copying. Okay. So if this is false, then we want to do the following. We want to grab the overlapped material because we're overlapping object. So grab the overlapped object and let's do this set active. So GameObject.set active. So we want to say if we're overlapping something, turn on the overlap mesh. There we go. But as a fail-safe, we want to turn off not overlapped. So we're going to grab not overlapped. We're going to type in set active again and do GameObject.set active. And that one is going to be false. And the last thing we need to do, just so that when we use the game manager knows what we're looking for, is we need to go to the scene variables, and set overlapping to be true. So hold down Alt and left click and drag to get a set variable. We're going to just drag this out and make it bool literal, and we're going to set that to be true. So all we're saying here is if I am currently overlapping an object and I have not dropped this object, please turn on the overlapping geometry, turn off the not overlapped geometry, and tell this variable overlapping that it's true. Okay, so I'm going to put a little comment group around this, call this overlapping, and I'm going to select all of this, and this is the beauty about code. I'm going to go Control-D to duplicate and move it down. I'm going to change this one to not overlapping. And all we need to do is go through here and switch the variables around. First of all, we're no longer going to use onTriggerStay, so right click on that and replace it with onTriggerExit. And when onTriggerExit, if dropping is still false, we're going to tell overlapped to be false and not overlapped to be true, and we're going to tell overlapping to be false. So all we're saying is if we're no longer overlapping anything, then this mesh needs to be disabled. This mesh needs to be enabled, the not overlapped one, and then we need to tell the manager that we're no longer overlapping something. Okay, so let's see how this works. It's not going to be 100%, but I just want to kind of show you bit by bit the code work in action. Okay, so you'll see that it's currently enabled. When I go over, it goes red, green, red, green. Problem is the base model is enabled. We need to disable that. But you'll see that I can now change based on, and if I click here, you'll still be able to drop it. So we need to rectify that. Let me turn this mesh off. Let's try that again so you can see the proper result. Okay, so it's green, red, green, red, green. So it's working. So whenever we overlap something, it tells us that it's currently overlapping something. But we haven't actually inserted that into the manager code. So the manager code, when we go to Tiny Room Manager, let me maximize this. We currently have code for moving around. We have code for dropping. So this is where we're going to do our first bit of code. We're going to ask if placing is true and plug the and into the brancher. So if placing is true and I'm going to go to my scene and grab overlapping, and if overlapping is equal, plug that into the B. And this here is going to be a bool literal. If overlapping is equal to false and placing is equal to true, we should be able to place the object. So it's as simple as that. We're just checking to see if this is true and that is true, then this should be true, which means we should be able to place the object. So we can check that now. You'll be able to, leave the flow graph running in the bottom here. So we're going to zoom out. We're going to select it over there, just make sure it's working. Click here. Look at how when I click where it's red, notice how it can't close it off, so you can't drop it. But the moment it's green, and I click on it, it's able to drop the object. So far so good. Biggest issue is the object is still green, so it's not changing to the final original object, so that when I place it, I want it to look like that. So let's resolve that issue. So in the prefab of the object we're using, in here, we're going to create our first custom event. So right click and type in custom event. This is a custom event, just like when you create a custom method or function in code, you can create a custom event, give it a name over here. So let's talk about this drop. Let's call this object has been dropped. You can call this anything you want. So I'm going to select it and go Control C to save it for later. So object has been dropped. What do I want to do when I drop the object? I want to clearly disable the not overlapped. So we're going to duplicate that, because that's the one that should be currently active, the green one. So we're going to disable the green one by simply just saying turn that off. And then we're going to grab our original model. We're going to type in set active again. And this one's going to be set to true. And the last thing we need to do is set this dropped ball to be true, so that what happens is once it's dropped, none of this, all this information at the top here stops working at these branches over here. So we're going to say drop is going to be set to true. So now we have dropped the object. So let's put a comment group around this. Dropped object. Okay, again, keeping it very basic, very simple. Now, how do we call this function? So I'm going to again copy this to be safe. We're going to call it from the manager. So we're going to go to our manager. And when we actually drop the object right here, this is where we're dropping the object. Straight after this, we have, remember, made a reference to the current spawned object. I want to grab that out. And I'm going to say, drag from this and type in custom event. And we're going to look for trigger custom event. We're going to paste that name next to the orange dot of the event we created. And the thing is, this event is not on the tiny room manager. It's on this currently spawned object. So we have to plug this where it says self. So we fire that function or that method or that event inside of the appropriate object, which is the object we've actually currently been moving around. So let's see how that works out. That should now do the trick. We should no longer have any weird glitches. We can test it. Let's drop the first object. If the bed is green, it's going to go solid. If I select the next one, notice how it's red because I'm overlapping. But see, I don't have a wall that's facing towards me. I need to add a wall there because I can actually just kind of half-assed it and drop it there, and I've dropped it. So now it's working. So the system is working. There will be no overlapping. What I mean by that is I have to put walls where we can't see that are facing away from the camera. I'll do that at a later stage, but I just want you to know that the system is working. So what I want to do next is, how do we rotate this object? How do we make it so that as I'm moving it around, I can rotate and reposition the object as I want? We are going to do that inside the actual manager. We're going to do a few things. So this is where we move the spawned object. Now we need to have one that we can rotate the spawn object. So I'm going to add a new update. And before I do anything, I need to run it through a branch. And I want to check like we're doing here. I'm going to copy and paste this placing. So we need to see if placing is true and I want to check if placing is true and I'm holding down my right mouse button for rotation. So I'm going to drag off B and type in input.get mouse button. And for those of you who haven't really worked with this a lot, the mouse buttons are assigned values. So the left mouse button is 0, right mouse button is 1, middle mouse button is 2. So that is your standard set. So if the we wanted to use the right mouse button. That has to be 1. So if we're saying if the right mouse button is down and placing is true, which means we're currently creating an object and putting it in the world. If those two are true, this branch will come back as we're able to rotate the object. So in order to rotate, I'm just going to add a new object variable here. Let's call this rotation speed. It's going to be a float. And by default, I'm going to set this value to be 5. So we are going to drag the speed in here. I'll show you what we're going to do with it. And if this is true, we're going to drag out and say transform.rotate. We're going to use transform.rotate x angle, y angle, z angle, because the only angle I want to rotate the object in is the y. If I look at what I mean by that is the y in the level is always up. So if I rotate my room, keep an eye on the y value that says -90 in the inspector. As I rotate, notice that that's the one that is rotating. So as we progress with this project, we're going to put paintings on the wall and we're going to change that. But for now, we're just placing it on the ground plane, so y is more than enough. Okay, so for this to rotate, transform.rotate, all it does is whatever value you feed into there, as long as it's being fed an update, it'll rotate that amount of every frame that you're currently working. So we're saying I want to rotate this object by the amount of speed multiplied by, plug that into the y, we might as well do that now, multiplied by my mouse input. So if my mouse moves left, I want it to rotate counterclockwise, and if I move it right, I want it to move clockwise, so left and right. So I'm going to drag this out. I'm going to type in input.get axis raw. The reason I'm getting an axis as opposed to getting a button down is an axis is a float value. So if I move the mouse to the left, it's going to be a negative value. If I move it to the right, it's going to be a positive value. And the reason I'm going raw is I want the full value. So an axis allows for looping between values 0 to 1 through 0.01, 0.2, so on and so forth. But I just want it, if I move my mouse right, I want it to be a full 1. If I move it left, I want it to be a full negative 1. Now the axis name I'm using is mouse X. So mouse space X, uppercase M, uppercase X. That is the name that Unity gives it. So if we go to Edit, Project Settings, go to Inputs, Manager. If you open up your axes, you'll see that you have mouse X over there. If we open that up, you'll see that it's mouse X, and it's using mouse movement on the X-axis. The X-axis is side to side, your horizontal, and mouse Y would be vertical. Okay, so that should rotate the object as long as the object is being placed and the mouse is down. So let me show you the first issue with this, and then we're going to go and rectify that. I drop the object in the world and I start right-clicking and rotating. Notice how it's not rotating. This is beautiful. Let's just double check why it's not rotating. Oh, of course, I made this mistake early on. So I am actually rotating, but because it says self, I'm actually rotating this manager. So if you notice that when I do that, nothing happens. I need to be rotating a specific object. So I'm going to move this down because we have reference to this object. So if we go to scene, we are rotating the current spawn prefab. So drag that in and plug that into self. And that is the object we want to rotate. We don't want to rotate the manager. You can't see the manager. The manager is invisible in the game. I want to put a comment group around this. Call this rotate placed object. Just going to change this color to something interesting. Okay, so let's try that again. This time it'll work. Okay, so I'm going to drop the object, and notice when I rotate, it's working, but when I rotate, it's also moving because it's raycasting and hitting the object. So only when I get to the end of the raycast, it starts to rotate the way it is. So I want to, when I'm rotating, I shouldn't be able to be moving at the same time. And this is a quick fix, really simple. We're going to fix it over here. So I'm going to just give myself some room to work with. Probably not going to need that much space, but let's just make it smaller again. Okay, so I need to do two checks. I need to check if it's placing like I'm doing right now, and then I'm going to go and we're going to plug that. And I want to know if this here, this input.get mouse button, I'm going to duplicate that and bring it down here. So over there, we're asking to see if it's true. Here, I want to make sure we're going to check to see if it is equal to, add a bool literal, to false. So if this is false, that means we're not holding the button down, which means we should be able to just move the object. But if it does come back as true, we are actually currently placing the object, which means rotating the object. So we should not try to do anything fancy like rotate and move at the same time. So let's check this out. If I click bed, go into the world, rotate, you'll see I can now rotate. If I release the rotate, I'll be able to move again. If I rotate, let's just find a nice positioning for the bed. Let's go like that. Actually, let's go complete 45-ish. I want to bring it close to the wall and I want to drop it. So now it works. So if I try to drop another object in here, I cannot, because there is no room or space for this other bed to fit in. Unless I go really to the, like I said, I haven't got walls in here yet. So I've got to assign some walls to the either side of this so that we don't get this issue. And that's it for the rotation. So we are done with this video. When we come to the next video, we're going to be able to select objects to delete, select objects to move and rotate again, and then drop them once again, even though once they're in the level. So we're going to do that. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.